In the dawn of morning at 5:05 local time from the Ukrainian border, 5 solid rocket boosters lit up a frozen field in Zaporizhia Oblast, and each sent a 6-ton of cruise missiles screaming into the sky, steady climbing to the sky. They are aimed toward their target Titan barricades, also known as Russia's second premier missile test range, and a facility responsible for preparing Oresnik ballistic missiles that have been hammering Ukraine's second cities for weeks, causing tons of casualties and suffers. The 5 weapons you see here now, called FP5, flamingos are climbing fast, heading east toward the most heavily defended airspace on the planet. Their destination was only 650 kilometers away, but the Ukrainians weren't sending the missiles where the Russians expected. The boosters burned for 6 seconds, white-hot exhaust columns of infrared energy that every thermal sensor within 50 kilometers could see. Then they separated, tumbling into the dark below. Think of it like a bottle rocket strapped to a paper airplane. The rocket gets it off the ground, but the moment it burns out, the airplane has to fly on its own. For 1.4 seconds, nothing powered the missiles. 6 tons of fiberglass fuel and explosive times 5. But before anything, these flamingos must defy the first layer of Russia's defense, the S-400 radar. This is not even close to a challenge, since these flamingos are made by light materials, so to the radar they look completely invisible. That's how millions of dollars radar systems got bypassed. Coasting on momentum in January air, then the AI-25 turbofans caught the signal, intel being forwarded about the fact that there are missile airborning in Russia. Meanwhile, the flamingos began descending toward their cruise altitude of 50 meters. Not there yet still, at 400 meters, decelerating through the transition from ballistic climb to low-level cruise. This is the most vulnerable phase of any cruise missile seconds flight. Too slow to outrun anything and too high to hide from anything. Painted in neon for every radar within the line of sight. Directly below them sat the most densely defended strip of airspace on the planet, the Russia-Ukraine contact line, hundreds of kilometers of overlapping radar coverage, SAM batteries stacked in echelons. Crews who had been tracking Ukrainian drones and missiles for 4 years straight. But Ukraine's seconds planners didn't send 5 Flamingos missile on parallel tracks like a shooting gallery. The formation spread across a 40 kilometers front wide enough that no single Buck battery's engagement radar could track more than 1 or 2 missiles simultaneously, but close enough that the entire wave hit the contact line within the same 90-second window. Every SAM crew along the crossing axis had to pick a target and commit. And picking one meant ignoring 4. The Russian Buyan-M battery, the SA Ving-Sept, a medium-range surface-to-air system, organic to infantry divisions along the front, had one of the flamingos in its 9 Stront 6 engagement radar, crossing target medium altitude boost to cruise transition. The exact shot the crew practiced at Ashluk 100 times. They had roughly a 30-second window while the missile was still descending. They fired. The interceptor climbed on a converging trajectory, accelerating toward the point in space where the math said the flamingo would be in 4 seconds. But the flamingo was sinking faster than the prediction allowed. Every 1/10 of a second it dropped closer to the ground, and every meter of descent added more clutter to the Buck seconds radar picture. Ground returns, smearing the fire control solution like rain on a windshield. The tracking that was clean at 400 meters turned to noise at 150. At 80, the engagement radar was fighting to hold a target that was dissolving into the terrain beneath it. Imagine trying to track a specific car on a highway from a helicopter. You never have a chance, and the same thing happened to Russian now. Easy when the road is empty, but the moment that car merges into bumper-to-bumper traffic, it disappears. That second's what was happening to the Buck seconds radar picture. The flamingo was merging into the ground. The interceptor passed through the formation seconds altitude without a hit. 50 meters above the ground, the flamingos leveled off and pushed to 900 km/h. But the worst part was still to come. Russian air defense stacks its layers, medium range on top, short range underneath, each covering the other's seconds blind spots. The Buck takes the first shot at altitude. Whatever survives gets handed to the goalkeeper. The Buyan-M, 2 NATO calls it the SA, 15 Gauntlet exists for exactly this moment. While the Buck works the medium altitude problem, the Tour sits inside its coverage bubble and waits for whatever walks through. Think of it as the last defender between the striker and the goal. If they got through, the game's over. Its radar is optimized for the exact scenario the Buck just failed at. Fast targets hugging the ground in heavy clutter. Engagement floor 10 meters. Reaction time from detection to launch 5 to 8 seconds. 3 seconds, no faster, responding surface-to-air missile in the Russian inventory. The tour crew had the Flamingos on radar, slow, fast southern edge of their 16 kilometers envelope. They fired at the nearest one exactly as Ukraine had hoped. The Buyan-M can engage one target at a time, fire and guide the interceptor to the computed intercept point, assess the result, and then slew to the next target and start the cycle over. Against a single cruise missile, that second's more than enough. Against 5 crossing its envelope simultaneously at 900 km/h, that math is brutal. One engagement takes 8 to 1 2 seconds. 5 Flamingos transit the tour's 216 kilometers window in about 20 seconds. The crew got their shot at 1. The other 4 were through the envelope before the system could cycle. The interceptor's seconds proximity fuse detonated a fragmentation ring several hundred meters in front of the targeted Flamingo Second's flight path. But it didn't matter. The Flamingo Second's airframe is fiberglass composite, not aluminum. A few shards went through it without hurting anything vital. The engagement window was now closed and the Flamingos flew on. Every Russian radar operator behind the front row expected them to turn east towards Russia proper, joining the westward F-facing threat axis that the entire southern military district's second air defense architecture was built. To counter, but the Flamingos turned south. The formation went into Rostov Oblast, then curved east away from Kapistan Yar, away from the target, flying in the opposite direction of every cruise missile attack Ukraine had launched in nearly 4 years of war. If you pull up the map, you can see why. A straight line from Zaporizhia to Volgograd and Yar runs through a gauntlet of Russia's second most layered air defense corridor. S-400 batteries covering Volgograd, with engagement radars reaching 400 kilometers. MiG-31 interceptors on patrol over the Astrakhan corridor. 3 seconds Zaslon radars scanning for exactly the kind of subsonic cruise missile the Flamingo is. Pole 2-1, GPS jamming on cell towers, blanketing every populated area within the navigation denial. All of it calibrated, rehearsed, and facing due west towards the threat. Ukraine could have tried the direct route. Send 5 Flamingos and accept that 3 or 4 get swatted down. That's seconds the math. Maybe 1 or 2 get through and 1 is enough, but that's seconds a coin flip against a target worth a smarter play. Ukraine's planners looked at that wall and came up with something genius. Flying 1,800 kilometers to hit something 650 kilometers away sounds insane in the first place, because it's seconds, like driving from New York to Miami to get to Philadelphia. Unless every highway between New York and Philadelphia resembles the Fury Road from Mad Max, then Miami starts looking better. But the long route created a problem Ukraine couldn't engineer away. These engines belong on training jets. Motorseek built them decades ago in Titan barricades to power the Aero L-39 Albatross, a jet trainer that student pilots flew on supervised solos, 2-hour flights, full ground crews between every sortie. Firepoint, the Ukrainian startup company that builds the Flamingos, bought thousands of these from scrapyards. Those shall have the price of Yusun's toys. Old Soviet metal refurbished, bolted onto cruise missiles and told to do something no L-39 instructor ever imagined those engines could do. Each engine has maybe 10 hours of life left. Tonight they need less than 2. But those 2 hours will be the hardest flying these turbofans have ever done. The direct flight is 43 minutes. The southern arc pushes toward 2 hours, and every additional minute is a minute those refurbished engines have to keep running at 50 meters in sub-zero air. Commercial jets have anti-icing systems, heated intakes with air routed to critical surfaces, redundant backups tested 1,000 times in controlled conditions. The AI-25 has none of that. At 50 meters altitude in freezing conditions, these engines are gulping dense, moisture-laden air at enormous volume. That moisture crystallizes on intake surfaces and compressor blades, disrupting airflow until the compressor stalls. A stall at 50 meters turns a cruise missile into a 6-ton lawn dart. Round impact in under 4 seconds. The engines that student pilots once trusted on supervised solos were now the single point of failure on 5 weapons that took months to plan. And the clever route that dodged every Russian SAM had doubled the window in which the Flamingo's second's own machinery could down them. And if the cold weather were a bump in the road, then this next issue is a giant sinkhole they have to drive around. Next came Kikia, one of the emptiest landscapes in Europe. Buddhist steppes stretching to every horizon, almost no population, practically zero infrastructure. The kind of place where satellite imagery is one shade of brown for 300 kilometers in every direction. The Flamingos crossed it in near total electromagnetic silence. No trace, no signal, only silence. And for the first time since launch, the anti-jam antenna arrays pulled clean GPS fixes and corrected whatever navigational drift accumulated during the frontline crossing. No cell towers meant no Pole 2-1 GPS jamming. For once, emptiness was an ally, but emptiness cuts both ways. The backup terrain contour matching, or TERCOM navigation, which reads the ground with a radar altimeter and matches it against a stored terrain map, needs features to reference ridges, river bends, elevation changes. Kikia has none of it. If GPS dropped here, satellite fault, onboard failure, anything, the missiles would have no way to know where they were. They would fly straight until the fuel ran out and crater in fields. Nobody would search for months. 5 navigation threads stretched thin across a landscape that offered 0 second chances. Thankfully, the Flamingos cleared Kilikia and turned north toward the Caspian coast, toward Kasputin Yar, and right into the one thing the long route couldn't avoid. The western Caspian coastline is not empty. The Russian Caspian flotilla patrols these waters out of Makala and Astrakhan. And on this morning, a Buyan-M class corvette was doing exactly that. Weighing in at 950 tons, they're tiny for a warship, but these corvettes have positive Mi-air search radars. And over open water, that radar has a cheat code that no amount of composite construction can beat. Over land, a low-flying missile seconds radar return gets tangled with terrain, buildings, power lines, noise the Flamingos can hide in. Over water, the picture is clean. Anything airborne shows up against a blank background like a flashlight in a dark room. The Ship Seconds Combat Information Center registered contacts low altitude, high subsonic heading north. The Buyan meters carried an AK, 630 rotary cannon, and IGL shoulder launched missiles for self-defense. But the Flamingos were too far and too fast to engage. By the time a gunner trained the AK, 630 on the bearing, they would be gone. The captain picked up the radio instead. Contact report. Bearing, speed, altitude heading transmitted to Caspian Flotilla headquarters in Astrakhan. 1,800 kilometers of route planning. Every radar avoided. Every SAM sidestep just got compromised by a ship on a routine patrol that happened to look at the right screen at the wrong moment. Flotilla HQ relayed the report to the Regional Air Defense Command, and here the intercept chain hit a wall that brought the Flamingos their lives, at least for the moment. Cruise missile contacts from the south didn't match a single threat template in the system. Every scramble, procedure, and standing order in the Southern Military District was oriented west. Fast movers heading north from the Caspian weren't in any 1 second's playbook. The duty officer needed verification. Friendly commercial flotilla aircraft returning to base. The contact perimeters screamed cruise missiles, but from that bearing, it cost extra minutes to classify. Not many, but enough. At Aktubinsk, the 929th State Flight Test Center adjacent to Kasputin Yar, a MiG-31 Foxhound crew received the scramble order. The MiG-31 does Mach 2.35, fastest combat aircraft in operational service on Earth. Its Zaslon AM is the most powerful radar in Russian service. Tracks 10 targets, engages 4 simultaneously. This aircraft was designed from the fuselage up to intercept cruise missiles. If you built a machine specifically to hunt down and swat a Flamingo out of the sky, you'd end up with something that looks a lot like the MiG-31. And right now, one crew is sprinting across the tarmac toward theirs. But none of this happens instantaneously. The MiG-3 1 seconds D30 F6 turbofans need 90 seconds from cold start to stable idle. 90 seconds while Flamingo's missile are covering at 15 kilometers per minute. Main engine spooling, afterburner kicked in, and 2,500 kilograms of thrust pinned both crew to their seats. Gear up 90 kilometers. Climbing through the cold January sky over Astrakhan. Nose pitched toward the dark southern horizon, 80 kilometers. The Zaslon needed warm-up calibration before it could scan. The phased array has to stabilize, or the first few sweeps produce garbage returns. 70. Now the Wizzo in the rear cockpit activated the radar. Ground control passed the bearing from the ship seconds report. Data already minutes old. But here was the deeper problem. The Flamingos had maintained their lateral spread from the contact line through the entire southern route. By now approaching from the south, they were converging on the target complex from slightly different bearings spread across 30 kilometers up front. The Zaslon seconds beam sweeps a 140-degree cone, but each swap catches whatever is in its path at that instant. A missile 15 kilometers left to the beam center doesn't exist until the antenna sweeps back to that bearing. 5 missiles spread across 30 kilometers meant the radar was effectively searching 5 separate haystacks, one at a time. And that's when the strike matters. The pilot pointed south and the Zaslon began sweeping. Clutter ground returns a January temperature inversion over the step-bending radar energy in unpredictable ways. Ghost returns and shadow zones in exactly the altitude band where the Flamingos were flying. The Wizzo narrowed the elevation scan. The Zaslon seconds published detection range against a low-altitude cruise missile is 65 kilometers. That number comes from Ashuluk under test conditions with a cooperative target on a known heading against unannounced contacts from the wrong direction over dark steppe effective range drops. How far depends on everything the textbook doesn't cover. 60 kilometers to Kapanar. Then the MiG got lucky. A return faint bearing 175, range uncertain. The Wizzo tried to promote it from a search hit to a track. The system needed several consecutive returns at consistent bearing and range to build a firing solution. 2 sweeps, then nothing. The only meaningful radar reflections on a 1-2 meters fiberglass cruise missile are the metal engine, NL, and the control surfaces. From certain aspects, the Zaslon was hunting returns roughly the size of motorcycles, 4 or 5 kilometers down with the nose. Lower altitude reduces clutter but shrinks the radar horizon. One problem traded for another. The Wizzo cycled modes track while scan, single target track wide search. Panzer batteries around Yasputin Yar had rotated south based on the ship report. Everyone was looking across a 30 kilometers arc. Nobody had a lock. 3-5 kilometers. Solid return now. 3 consecutive sweeps, constant bearing, decreasing range. The Wizzo commanded lock on. The Zaslon transitioned from search to single target track. For the first time since launch, a Russian weapon system had a Flamingo in a firing solution. 1 Flamingo out of 5. The pilot selected the R-37 Mach 6, the longest-ranged air-to-air missile in Russian operational service. At this distance, roughly 15 seconds for it to intercept. The Flamingos needed about 100 seconds to reach the target. The math should have been more than enough to swat all 5. If the crew could find all 5, he fired at the one he had. But he didn't. The R-37 dropped off the rail and the booster slammed it to 6 times the speed of sound in under 3 seconds, steering toward the computed intercept point, the spot in space where the R-37 seconds trajectory and its target's trajectory would converge. The intercept points are predictions. They assume the target holds its current speed and heading. The targeted Flamingo was entering its terminal phase, a slight climb, a final course correction, 2 degrees, maybe 3, as the navigation system made its last refinement toward the target site, coordinates negligible for warhead accuracy, enough to shift the intercept point by hundreds of meters at this closure rate. The R-37 reached the computed coordinates. The Flamingo was now 400 meters past them, and behind it 4 more were seconds from impact. 4 missiles, the MiG never had a chance to engage. Then at 7:17 local time, the first Flamingo pitched into its terminal dive. The warhead, an 1150 kilograms penetrating charge, the same class as a Blue 109 bunker buster, punched through the roof of a hangar-type building used for Archnik pre-launch preparation. It didn't detonate on contact. It was designed to keep going through the roof, through the floor, into the infrastructure underneath, and then it detonated. The blast wave ripped outward through the structure from the inside, blowing walls off their foundations, collapsing the ceiling inward, and everything in the building turned into shrapnel. 4 more impacts followed within seconds. The hangars where Russian crews had spent weeks preparing Oreshnik intermediate-range ballistic missiles for launch were tore open from below. Assembly infrastructure, logistics warehouses, servicing equipment shredded by weapons that cost less than Moscow apartments, powered by junkyard engines assembled by a startup founded by architects and game designers. Russia, for the first time, had to accept the defeat from whom they never expected to have a chance against them. If you want to know more about the reason Ukraine is winning the war, look no more. Click on the channel's banner and find out the truth hiding behind claims. Bye for now.